Well, the winds of change are beginning to blow through Silicon Valley. Last week, we saw Google essentially Bud Light itself with perhaps the worst public rollout in tech history. The laughably woke Gemini AI program has been roundly ridiculed and mocked for all the right reasons. Gemini was it was reimagining images. If you asked for George Washington, you were likely to get a black man in a powdered wig wearing breeches and a silk waistcoat. When asked to recreate the image of Vikings, Gemini spit out Asian, black, and Hispanic Vikings as opposed to the Nordic Vikings of, real history. The blatant built-in bias was all just too much, and it was just roundly mocked and ridiculed. It's also damning. It's very damning to the programmers, really, because what it shows is the programmers are the ones that inserted that bias, namely these progressive techies. They push their own bias and ideological bent into the program that could essentially rewrite world history as we know it. But the thing that's more galling is that they went ahead and publicly released the program without anyone standing up and saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is wrong. Maybe we should kind of test this a little bit before we spit it out in the public. Well, now Apple's Tim Cook is in the sights of the Free Enterprise Project. And, well, we want to get to the details of the case. Scott Shepard. Scott is a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy. He's a friend of the programs, and he also happens to be the director of the Free Enterprise Project. And we welcome him back to the show. Scott, hello, sir. It's good to have you. So you saw...
Good to be on with you again, Brian and Steve.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to have you again. Now, we're kind of laughing about Gemini because it was just such a catastrophe, that rollout. And they shed $90 billion in market share in the days following, and they're definitely Bud Lighted themselves. They're trying to fix it now. But this isn't just Google. It isn't just Facebook. It's also Apple. What is going on in Apple that has got you guys going after them?
Well, it's as you point out, it's all of tech, all of Silicon Valley, which when we were young was supposed to be a libertarian paradise. Tech was supposed to set people free. And if you remember, all the way back in the 1982 Super Bowl, Apple ran an ad saying that its home computers were going to free the future from the possibility and the danger of 1984 Orwellianism. Now, Apple is the Orwellians. And so what we've discovered in looking into that, and this won't surprise any of you who have listened to anybody at Apple very carefully, but we understand, we've found many ways in which Apple discriminates on the basis of viewpoint in hiring and promotion in the management of its company. Again, no surprise, they went after Parler. They do everything they can to try to stop conservative thought, but also just dissent. I mean, the lock they have on their app store is by itself sort of tyrannical and weird. But what we discovered is, for instance, they say that they don't discriminate on viewpoint, but they have a matching program for charitable donations. You know what? Charitable donations are not acceptable, won't be matched. Two kinds. One, to fraternities and sororities, which how many people at Apple could have gotten into one of those? And two, religious institutions or affiliated institutions. So absolute discrimination against the religious there. And then they've got a rule that everybody has to follow Apple policies all the time. Fair enough. But they build discrimination and viewpoint discrimination right into those policies. They say that it's company policy to discriminate on the basis of race, sex, and orientation, as long as it's in favor of diverse groups. And they say that they establish that Apple's position on X, Y, and Z political thing is part of those policies. And then if you are accused of violating any of the policies, then as soon as the investigation starts, employees are no longer allowed to speak about the investigation, about what they're charged with, about what the response is anymore. And so they claim that employees can speak out. They can't. And then additionally, one of the things they say in their human rights policies, et cetera, is that employees can't commit hate. Well, that sounds lovely, except Then it gives lots and lots of shareholder money to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which used to be a civil rights organization. Now it's just a protector of left-wing orthodoxy. It gives the Southern Poverty Law Center money, so the Southern Poverty Law Center will turn around and label as hate right-wing organizations and right-wing thought, and then Apple can call that hate as well and discriminate even further. So what we have is a corporation absolutely dedicated to viewpoint discrimination and delighted to lie about it.
Oh, they love it. They absolutely love it. And I'm glad you pointed out sort of the feeling, that sort of vibe that we used to get in the early days of Silicon Valley. Because we were sold all these people as young geniuses. A diverse set of young geniuses and up and coming tech moguls who had a very philanthropic sort of mission statement. And it was very. To be quite frank, it was a disruptor, rebel attitude, and they even sold this attitude to their acolytes or employees or potential employees as, we're here to be disruptors. We don't like capitalism. We want to get in here and change it. We want to add more, freedom. We want to go up against big government. And what has happened to them over the years? I mean, now, as you're pointing out, it's a company that has discrimination built on race and religion into its own foundation, and it's an ultra crony capitalist, fascist, technocratic. That's what we see in their policy and behavior, which is completely the opposite of what they say to the people coming up the ranks, even to this day. It's like, oh, meet us at Burning Man, bro. We're going to do some cool art and make sure President Trump never comes back.
Yeah. Well, I think that what you've described is part of what's caused this weirdness and this strange development. Take Facebook, for example. Facebook was founded by a couple of kids from Harvard and a couple of kids, the Winklevoss twins or whatever, who had a giant amount of money handed to them and got lucky with this investment. Well, the results of that are that Harvard kids and billionaires' sons don't know a lot about the world, and they were very successful. They became overnight billionaires. At some level, they feel guilty about that, but at another level, they don't have any idea how the world works. So to try to assuage their guilt while still being billionaires, right? They signed on to all these lefty concepts to assuage their guilt and to do it in a way that doesn't cost them anything. So they get to be billionaires. They get to screw up all of society, but portray to themselves that they're doing right by the most disadvantaged. And then additionally, I think, and Zuckerberg is a perfect example of this. Zuckerberg is a one-hit wonder. Zuckerberg doesn't have a lot of additional thoughts in his head. Look at how much he poured into making Facebook into Meta catastrophically, right? Almost as bad as the EV investments that Ford and the other auto companies have made. And so his mind was going to be filled with whatever was nearby. And what was nearby to Silicon Valley was San Francisco. So we've seen the lunacy of San Francisco driven worldwide by the money of the tech company.
Yeah, and the thing is, Scott, and you mentioned that 1982 Apple commercial, hailed as one of the greatest commercials ever. And I remember that. And they showed the woman jogging through a crowd of people that were mindlessly looking up at an image of Big Brother shouting down from them. She hurls a hammer through the screen and boom, we're off to the races. The new tech industry has been born, and this will stop oligarchs and authoritarians from ruling over us. Now we have one-on-one communication with each other. It all sounded so good, didn't it? But then a funny thing happened. Funny thing happened on the way to the billionaires party. They are all bubble dwellers, as you mentioned. So they all associate with like-minded bubble dwellers. Of course, they don't know how the real world works. They've never lived in it.
Yeah, they've never been threatened by anything at all, right? I think in part they were somewhat threatened by Occupy Wall Street and the Eat the Rich movement, or at least they thought that was a threat. And so they fairly explicitly, along with the titans of Wall Street, the self-appointed titans of Wall Street, made a fairly explicit deal with the left. don't take our billions, and we'll use other people's money, but in the investment houses or shareholders' assets to push your personal policy or your policy goals. We'll push left-wing policy goals as long as there's an express exclusion to the disasters those will cause for us billionaires. And so, that's what we get.
Yeah, and I mean, getting back to what we're seeing with Gemini and some of these other things now, I mean, there's a growing concern that the integrity of the entire internet is at risk right now, considering these woke psychopaths have now unleashed woke artificial intelligence into all of our apps. It's in, it's in all your communications apps. You can hardly get it off of Microsoft. You can hardly get it out of Google. You can hardly, it's just arriving everywhere, and there's no way to scrub it for the most part. And what do you think? What do you think's at stake here if this isn't reined in? Because I'm kind of starting to wonder if we're not going to have a crisis of reality or some sort of crisis of zeitgeist as this stuff integrates itself and becomes more ubiquitous in all of our tech.
Well, I've got to be honest with you. I think we're already there, because the less recognized, the less noticed story last week was reporting that Google already, and for the 2020 election, has a program, a background system. If you type a search request into Google and it has anything to do with politics or policy, they rewrite it behind the system to make it more left. And that's why you get the first 80 responses, no matter what you put in, are the left's view of whatever the topic is. And so that already, I suspect, changed a presidential election. I suspect that it could have massive effects in every conceivable way in the future. And I promise you that Google's response to the Gemini debacle is not, hey, we ought to stop doing that. It's, we have to become better at hiding what we're doing. And so I think that the only response that we can have in this country, if we want to save representative government, if we want to save American liberties, is to treat Google the way Ma Bell was treated all through the 20th century. Recognize that it is a monopoly, and then either require it to agree to being broken up into completely separate companies, or to be regulated like a public utility the way Ma Bell was for so many years, without any right to discriminate in any way against anybody or for anybody or with regard to any idea at all. Just like the phone company couldn't tap your phones and cut off a conversation if you were talking about conservative principles.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And, like we were talking about Gemini last week, we're kind of having a chuckle about it, because it was just, it's so absurd to see a black George Washington or an Asian Viking. It was just laughable, but it goes beyond this image creation. I was reading a story where a guy by the name of Peter Kafka put into Gemini, who is worse for society, Adolf Hitler or Elon Musk? And it couldn't determine. It said, well, they've both done bad things, essentially. Even Nate Silver, who's a lefty, even he piped up and he goes, look, Hitler's actions led to the death of millions of people. You sure this is the answer you want to give? Of course, I mean, so it really is kind of crazy. And Google's original mission statement was to index all the world's information.
Yeah.
So that was their mission statement, and now they're indexing it according to ideology and only spewing out their ideology. It's dangerous.
It's terrifying, and I think that we have to recognize that this is an existential crisis, not just for genuinely even the whole of the American Republic, but for all of freedom in the globe. Churchill, 80 years ago, was talking about the Nazi threat being made more desperate, more perverse by the lights of a perverted science. I'm getting that part wrong, but technology had made the Nazis the greatest danger we'd ever seen and could cast us back into a new dark ages. Well, this is certainly because of the additional advances of technology. This is certainly the same sort of threat, but technology has advanced so far that they don't have to do it with guns anymore. They can do it with every single input into our information banks. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Not just on the image, not just on the output, on the stuff that they're throwing out there on the web, but on all the stuff that they're gathering from all of us and all of our inputs. I mean, it really is very, very scary, and I hope something happens. Scott, listen, we got to let you roll, but I just want to, before you leave, by the way, you can find Scott and all of the work over at nationalcenter.org, nationalcenter.org. Will you promise to come back and share with us the details of what happens with this case with Tim Cook and Apple? Can we get you to come back when this thing gets going?
Well, the Apple meeting was yesterday, so we presented the proposal. We don't know what the vote was yet, but it's only the beginning of shareholder season, so I can come back as much as you want to let you know what other companies were bothering, who else were suing, and how else we're trying to fight woke.
Right on. All right, there you go. Scott Shepard, keep up the good fight. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.